They laughed the moment she stepped through the door, and none of them realized they were seconds away from hearing the voice that would silence the entire room. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The downtown audition hall in Nashville buzzed with polished confidence and expensive perfume. Young singers warmed up beside mirrored walls, running scales under their breath while managers adjusted jackets, fixed makeup, and whispered promises about fame. Bright overhead lights reflected off chrome stands and glossy black floors, turning the room into a stage long before anyone had sung a note. Then the side door opened, and Claire Bennett walked in wearing a faded cream sweater, plain jeans, and a pair of worn brown flats that had clearly seen better years. Her hair was tied back in a simple knot, and she carried a canvas tote bag instead of a designer purse. The laughter began quietly, like a match catching in dry grass. A few contestants exchanged smirks. One man near the registration desk raised an eyebrow and muttered, "Housekeeping got lost." Another woman covered her mouth to hide a grin. Claire heard every word, but her face remained calm. She stepped forward with measured grace, as if she had walked into rooms like this many times before. Sophia Monroe noticed her first. At 26, Sophia was the favorite to win the showcase and made sure everyone knew it. Her silver dress shimmered under the lights, and every move she made seemed practiced for an audience. She tilted her head, studying Claire with theatrical concern. "Sweetheart," she said loudly enough for half the room to hear. "The volunteer entrance is down the hall." Laughter rippled wider this time. Claire offered a polite smile. "Thank you. I'm here to audition." Sophia blinked, then laughed harder than the others. "That makes it even better." Across the room, Judge Daniel Hayes looked up from his clipboard. A former producer with platinum records on his office wall, he had built a reputation for spotting stars in seconds and dismissing people even faster. His tailored navy blazer and perfect posture radiated authority. He glanced at Claire once, then back to his notes, already bored. "Name?" the assistant called. "Claire Bennett," she answered softly. The assistant frowned at the list. "You're number 32. Sophia leaned toward a nearby contestant and whispered something that made them both grin. Claire took a seat in the last row of folding chairs, setting her tote bag at her feet. Around her, voices rose with rehearsed confidence. Someone belted riffs near the water station. Another contestant bragged about a TikTok following of 2 million. Claire simply folded her hands in her lap and listened. What no one in that room knew was that 12 years earlier, conservatories had competed to recruit her. Critics once called her voice once in a generation. Then, without warning, she disappeared from every stage that mattered. Fame moved on. The industry forgot. But talent does not vanish because the spotlight turns away. Daniel Hayes checked the clock and sighed. "Let's move this along," he said. His eyes landed on Claire in the back row. "You there. Number 32. Come on up now. Let's get this over with." A hush fell, followed by scattered chuckles. Sophia crossed her arms, eager for the show. Claire stood slowly, smoothed the sleeves of her old sweater, and walked toward the stage with the quiet steadiness of someone carrying a secret the room was not prepared to hear. Claire Bennett stepped onto the small platform as if the laughter behind her belonged to another world. The stage lights were warmer than the waiting area, casting a soft gold glow across the microphone stand and the black piano in the corner. From the audience seats, Judge Daniel Hayes leaned back in his chair with the relaxed impatience of a man certain he had already seen enough. Sophia Monroe sat in the front row, one leg crossed over the other, smiling with open amusement. Several contestants pulled out their phones, hoping to capture what they assumed would be an embarrassing moment. Claire stopped at center stage and looked toward the judges' table. Her posture was straight, her chin level, her eyes steady. There was no anger in her face, no plea for sympathy, no sign that the room had managed to wound her. Daniel glanced at her application. Claire Bennett, he said flatly. No manager. No representation. No recent credits. He lowered the paper and looked over his glasses. You have not performed professionally in 12 years? That is correct, Claire answered. Her voice was gentle but clear. And what exactly have you been doing for 12 years? Sophia smirked before Claire could answer. Probably finding that sweater. More laughter scattered through the hall. Claire waited until it faded. Taking care of my father, she said. The room shifted almost imperceptibly. Daniel tapped his pen once. That is admirable, but this competition is for current talent. The industry moves quickly. Claire nodded. Talent does not always move with it. A few people exchanged glances. Daniel's jaw tightened. He was not used to being answered with calm precision. Fine, he said. What will you sing? Claire looked at the old grand piano beside the curtain. If it is allowed, I would prefer to accompany myself. That drew another wave of disbelief. One contestant laughed so hard he coughed. Sophia threw up her hands dramatically. This keeps getting better. Daniel sighed and motioned toward the piano. You have 90 seconds. Please do not waste them. Claire crossed the stage and ran her fingertips lightly over the polished wood before sitting on the bench. The movement was familiar, almost reverent. She adjusted the microphone stand slightly lower, then rested her hands above the keys without pressing them. The room, still amused, began to settle into curious silence. Daniel checked his watch. Sophia whispered to the woman beside her. Watch her forget the lyrics. Claire inhaled once, slow and measured. In that breath lived years no one in the room understood. Long nights in hospital waiting rooms. Bills stacked on kitchen counters. Singing softly beside a recliner. While her father drifted in and out of sleep. Turning down contracts, interviews, and tours because some promises mattered more than applause. The spotlight had left her, but discipline had not. She pressed the first chord. It was rich, controlled, and startlingly beautiful. Heads lifted. Phones lowered. Claire closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them again. Her fingers moved with elegant certainty across the keys. Not flashy, not rushed, but exact. Daniel stopped tapping his pen. Sophia's smile began to fade. The room felt smaller now, tighter, as if every wall had leaned inward to listen. Claire leaned toward the microphone. Her lips parted. Even the air seemed to pause. Somewhere in the back row, a contestant whispered, "Wait." Then Claire released her first note, and it rose through the hall like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The note did not simply fill the room, transformed it. Claire Bennett's voice rose clear and luminous, carrying the warmth of lived sorrow and the precision of years no one had bothered to imagine. The laughter that had followed her onto the stage vanished so completely it felt as if it had never existed. Phones lowered to trembling hands. Smirks froze halfway across faces. Even the humming fluorescent lights seemed quieter beneath the sound. Daniel Hayes straightened in his chair so suddenly that his pen rolled off the judge's table and onto the floor. He did not notice. Sophia Monroe's crossed legs slowly uncoupled as she stared at the woman in the old sweater with widening eyes. Claire held the note effortlessly, then let it resolve into the opening phrase of an old American standard, reshaped by her own artistry into something intimate and breathtaking. She did not oversing. She did not chase applause. She sang as if the song mattered more than the room. That was what stunned them most. Every contestant there had come to impress. Claire had come to tell the truth. Her hands moved across the piano keys with graceful confidence, building the melody in waves of tenderness and strength. The hall listened in complete surrender. A young contestant near the aisle, who had laughed the loudest earlier, slowly sat down. On the floor because his knees had gone weak with disbelief. Two assistants at the registration desk stopped working entirely. One of them wiped tears she could not explain. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table now, searching for flaws with the trained instincts that had built his career. Breath support, flawless. Pitch immaculate. Timing masterful. But beyond technique was the rarest quality of all, The thing producers chased for decades and almost never found. Presence. Claire commanded the room without demanding anything from it. She reached the chorus and opened the sound wider. It rolled through the hall like sunrise over dark water. Sophia's lips parted, then closed again. 4 years she had studied vocal runs, branding strategies, camera angles, social media growth charts, everything except the quiet gravity of genuine depth. And now she was watching it from 10 feet away. Claire's expression remained calm, but in her eyes lived memory. Hospital windows at dawn. Coffee gone cold beside unpaid bills. Singing softly while machines beeped in another room. Missing showcases, tours, contracts, all while caring for the only parent who had once worked double shifts so she could afford piano lessons. Sacrifice had refined her rather than diminished her. That truth rang through every note. She moved into the final line and softened the phrase until the entire hall leaned closer to hear it. No one coughed. No one whispered. No one dared interrupt the fragile beauty passing through the air. Then she ended on a note so pure it seemed to hover above them after her mouth had closed. Her fingers lifted from the keys. Silence followed, deep and sacred. Daniel Hayes slowly removed his glasses. Sophia stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. In the back row, someone began to clap once, then stopped, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Claire stood from the piano bench, adjusted the microphone half an inch, and waited with humble composure. She did not smile in triumph. She did not seek revenge with her gaze. She simply stood there, patient and dignified, while the room struggled to understand how badly it had misjudged her. Then Daniel rose to his feet. Daniel Hayes stood so slowly that the scrape of his chair across the polished floor sounded louder than thunder. For a man known throughout Nashville for measured reactions and ruthless standards, the gesture alone sent a shock through the room. Then he began to clap. One deliberate strike of palm against palm, then another, each one carrying the weight of public admission. The hall remained frozen for half a heartbeat before everyone else rose with him. Applause erupted from every corner, first scattered, then swelling into a standing ovation that shook the folding chairs and echoed off the high ceiling. Contestants who had mocked Claire moments earlier now clapped with flushed faces and lowered eyes. Several were cheering. Claire Bennett simply stood beside the piano with both hands lightly folded in front of her, accepting the praise with calm gratitude rather than triumph. She had waited 12 years for a room like this, yet she wore the moment like a simple coat. Daniel stepped from behind the judges' table and approached the stage. His usual confidence had been replaced by something rarer and more valuable. Humility. He stopped a respectful distance away and spoke into the microphone. Ms. Bennett, in 25 years of auditions, I have heard thousands of voices. He paused, searching for words he clearly did not often need to search for. Very few made me question everything I thought I knew. Yours just did. A hush settled again. Claire inclined her head politely. Daniel continued, no longer performing authority but speaking plainly. I judged you before you sang. That was unprofessional, and it was wrong. The room absorbed each word. Producers in the back exchanged glances. Assistants looked up from their clipboards. Sophia Monroe stared at Daniel in disbelief. Men like him were not supposed to apologize in public. Claire met his eyes with steady kindness. Thank you, she said softly. Nothing more. No lecture. No revenge. No need. Daniel turned to the panel and lifted Claire's application form. I would like to amend the process, he announced. Ms. Bennett is advancing directly to the final showcase tonight. Gasps broke across the room. Some contestants looked frustrated, but none dared object. They had heard what everyone else had heard. Talent had entered the building disguised as simplicity. Sophia rose abruptly from her chair. Her silver heels clicked sharply as she approached the aisle. For the first time that day, she looked uncertain. Claire, she said, voice thinner than before. I may have misread the situation. A few people glanced away, embarrassed for her. Claire stepped down from the stage and faced her at eye level. You did, she answered gently. Sophia swallowed. I am sorry. Claire studied the younger woman for a moment. seeing not cruelty now but insecurity dressed in expensive fabric. Then learn from it, she said. That would be enough. Sophia lowered her eyes. There was no sharper consequence than grace when guilt expects anger. In the back row, the contestant who had joked about housekeeping began gathering abandoned water bottles and cups from nearby seats, too ashamed to remain idle. Others quietly helped him. Daniel returned to the judge's table, still visibly unsettled by what had happened. "We will take a 10-minute break," he announced. "And when we return, I suggest everyone remembers that resumes do not sing. People do." Claire bent to pick up her canvas tote bag. One of the assistants rushed forward to carry it for her, but she smiled and kept it herself. As she walked toward the side hallway, the crowd parted without being asked. Some offered handshakes. Others simply stepped aside in respectful silence. The same room that had laughed when she entered now stood like an honor guard while she passed. Backstage, the noise of the standing ovation faded into a distant murmur, like thunder rolling away across open land. Claire Bennett stepped into the narrow green room and gently closed the door behind her. The small space held a folding table, 2 mirrors bordered by warm bulbs, and a rack of garment bags left by contestants who had dressed for attention. Claire placed her canvas tote on the chair, then rested both hands on the table and exhaled slowly. For the first time all day, the steadiness in her face softened. She was not shaken by the laughter. She had lived through things louder than laughter. But being seen again after so many unseen years carried its own weight. She opened the tote and removed a framed photograph wrapped in a soft scarf. It showed an older man with kind eyes standing beside a teenage Claire at an upright piano in a modest living room. Both were smiling as if the world had not yet asked them to choose between love and ambition. She touched the edge of the frame with her thumb. "We made it here," she whispered. 12 years earlier, every major label had wanted the young singer from Ohio with the impossible range and uncommon sincerity. Agents called daily. Showcases sold out. One magazine had predicted she would be the next defining voice of her generation. Then her father suffered a stroke 3 weeks before her national debut tour. Recovery was uncertain. Care was expensive. Family was small. Claire canceled everything before sunrise the next morning. Managers warned her she would vanish. Publicists said momentum could not be paused. They were right about the industry. They were wrong about what mattered. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with her father, worked mornings at a bookstore, taught piano lessons at night, and sang only where applause was not required. Hospital rooms, kitchen tables, front porches in summer, and the recliner by the window where he spent his final years. Success had knocked loudly. Duty had answered first. A gentle knock sounded at the green room door. "Come in," Claire said. Daniel Hayes entered without the armor he had worn all morning. No clipboard, no sharp expression. Just a man confronting his own reflection through someone else's dignity. He noticed the framed photograph in her hands. "Your father," Claire nodded. "He passed last heels. The industry rewards people who chase it," he said. "Sometimes too much. Then it forgets the people who do not," Claire replied, though there was no bitterness in her tone. Only fact. Daniel stepped closer to the mirror lights, their glow softening the years in his face. "Tonight's showcase will be streamed live. Producers from Los Angeles, New York, Austin, and Atlanta are already asking for meetings." Claire looked back at the photograph. "That is kind." Daniel frowned slightly. "Kind? Claire, this could restart everything." She set the frame down carefully. "Not everything needs restarting." He stared at her, unable to measure someone who did not hunger for what others worshipped. Another knock came. Sophia Monroe stood at the doorway, makeup retouched but confidence missing. In her hands was a paper cup of tea. "I thought you might want this before the finals," she said. Claire accepted it with a grateful nod. Sophia hesitated. "My mother used to sing while cleaning houses," she said softly. "I laughed at you because I was afraid you might be better than me." Claire held the warm cup between her palms. "Fear often dresses itself as arrogance," she said. Sophia's eyes filled, and she quietly stepped aside. Down the hall, the stage manager called 5 minutes to air. Claire looked once more at her father's photograph, then rose with the calm of someone who had already won long before entering the building. When Claire Bennett stepped back onto the main stage, the room that had mocked her earlier rose in instinctive silence. The live showcase lights were brighter now, broadcasting across cameras, monitors, and streaming feeds reaching living rooms from Seattle to Miami. Contestants stood along the side curtain in formal wear, each hoping for discovery. Yet every eye followed the woman in the simple cream sweater carrying nothing but a quiet presence and a paper cup of tea now set beside the piano. Daniel Hayes returned to the judges' table with a gravity that had replaced his usual polish. Beside him sat 2 guest judges flown in from Los Angeles that afternoon after hearing about the audition upset. Their resumes were legendary. Their expressions were curious. Daniel leaned toward his microphone. Our final performer tonight reminds us that greatness does not ask permission before entering a room. He turned toward Claire. Whenever you are ready. Claire nodded once and sat at the piano bench. She did not hurry. She adjusted the bench half an inch, smoothed the sleeves of her sweater, and rested her fingertips above the keys. The hall held its breath. Sophia Monroe stood backstage watching with arms folded tightly, no longer as armor but to steady herself. Claire began with a single low chord that rolled through the theater like distant thunder. Then another. Then a melody both new and strangely familiar, carrying the shape of old country roads, church pews, unpaid bills, sunrise over parking lots, and hope that refuses to die. She had chosen an original song. No one expected that. Her voice entered softly, intimate enough to feel spoken directly into the heart of each listener. She sang about promises kept when no one was watching, about ordinary kitchens where courage is born, about hands that grow tired but keep giving anyway. There were no flashy runs, no tricks designed for applause. Every note served meaning. The camera operators stopped whispering. A guest judge from Los Angeles slowly removed her earpiece, because she wanted nothing between herself and the sound. Claire reached the second verse and the room changed again. Some singers are impressive. A rare few become mirrors. People heard their own mothers in her phrasing, their fathers in her steadiness. The years they themselves had sacrificed and the dreams they feared were gone. Tears appeared in unexpected places. One stagehand near the curtain quietly sat on an equipment case and cried into his sleeve. Daniel Hayes did not hide the moisture in his eyes. He simply listened. Claire rose from the bench during the bridge and stood at the microphone while the piano track continued beneath her from a pre-recorded loop she had prepared years ago and never used. The choice stunned the judges. She had come ready long before anyone invited her. Her final chorus opened with power so controlled it seemed carved from light. The ceiling answered with resonance. Phones across the audience lifted, not to mock but to remember. Sophia pressed a hand to her mouth. She knew in that instant that comparison was pointless. There was room in the world for many voices, but moments like this belonged to only one. Claire finished on a sustained note that thinned into a whisper and disappeared like a prayer. No one moved. Then the theater exploded. Thousands of hands thundered together. People stood on chairs. Producers rushed toward the front row. Daniel Hayes remained seated for 1 second longer than the others, overwhelmed by the privilege of witnessing something he could never manufacture. Then he rose and joined the ovation. Claire bowed once, modest and sincere. She looked upward for the briefest moment, as if thanking someone beyond the lights. In homes across America, strangers who had tuned in for entertainment found themselves wiping tears. And backstage, where ambition had ruled all morning, humility quietly took its place. The applause refused to end. It rolled through the theater in waves, rising each time it seemed ready to fade. As if the crowd understood, they were not only celebrating a performance but correcting a mistake made earlier that day. Claire Bennett stood beneath the lights with one hand resting lightly against her heart. She bowed again, then stepped back from the microphone with the same modest grace she had carried into the building. No victory pose, no dramatic tears, just dignity. Daniel Hayes lifted his hand for calm, though his own expression was still shaken. "Please remain standing," he said into the microphone. Because what happened tonight deserves witnesses. The audience slowly settled, though many remained on their feet. Cameras continued streaming live. Social media feeds across the country flooded with clips titled In Disbelief. Who is Claire Bennett? Where has she been? Best audition ever. Daniel turned toward the production team at the side stage. Bring me the envelope now. A producer hurried forward with the sealed final results that had been prepared before Claire ever sang the showcase round. The assumption had been simple. The known names would finish on top. Daniel held the envelope, then paused. There are moments when rules should remain rules, he said. And there are moments when rules should remember why they exist. He opened the card and looked down. Tonight's winner, by unanimous decision after an emergency revote from the panel, is Claire Bennett. The theater erupted even louder than before. Sophia Monroe was the first contestant to begin clapping. Then she stepped onto the stage herself, crossed the polished floor, and embraced Claire gently. The gesture drew another swell of applause. You earned every bit of this, Sophia whispered. Claire smiled warmly. So can you, if you stop competing with shadows. Sophia laughed through tears and nodded. Daniel handed Claire the silver finalist trophy, but she accepted it with visible hesitation. Thank you, she said. It is beautiful. Then she turned toward the contestants lined near the curtain. May I say something? Daniel stepped aside at once. Claire faced the room, trophy in hand. This morning, some of you laughed at me. Years ago, I might have let that wound me. But life teaches you perspective. Illness teaches you perspective. Loss teaches you perspective. Most cruelty comes from fear, and most fear comes from believing there is not enough room for everyone. The room listened in complete stillness. There is room, she continued. Room for many voices. Room for young dreams and late beginnings. Room for polished stars and tired people in old sweaters. If you remember that, you will become more than successful. You will become kind. Several contestants lowered their heads. Others wiped tears openly. Daniel Hayes stared at the floor, humbled again by a lesson he had needed longer than he knew. From the front row, one of the Los Angeles guest judges stood and called out, Claire, I want to offer you a recording contract tonight. Gasps swept the audience. Another judge immediately followed. And I want first rights to produce the album. Laughter broke through the emotion. Claire looked stunned for the first time all evening. She glanced upward for a brief second, as if consulting the memory of someone no longer visible. Then she answered with careful honesty, I am grateful, but before I sign anything, I am taking tomorrow off. I promised my father I would visit the lake where he taught me my first song. The theater went silent, then rose once more in reverence. Daniel wiped his eyes and did not pretend otherwise. As confetti cannons prepared off stage for a celebration no one had expected to use, Claire Bennett held the trophy loosely at her side. The smallest person in the room had somehow become the measure of everyone in it. By sunrise the next morning, Claire Bennett's face was on every major entertainment site in America. Clips of the woman in the cream sweater had been viewed millions of times overnight. Comment sections that usually traded sarcasm now overflowed with something rarer. Gratitude. People wrote about mothers who had postponed dreams, fathers who had worked double shifts, grandparents who had been underestimated, and ordinary lives carrying extraordinary strength. In a world addicted to spectacle, Claire had reminded strangers that sincerity could still stop time. Yet while the country argued over contracts and chart predictions, Claire drove 2 hours east in a used blue sedan with the windows cracked open to the cool Tennessee air. The silver trophy sat buckled into the passenger seat, tilting slightly on curves. She wore the same sweater. Fame had arrived, but it had not yet learned where to sit. The road narrowed into pine-lined lanes before opening beside a quiet lake wrapped in morning mist. This was where her father had brought her when she was 9 years old, carrying a second-hand keyboard in the bed of an old pickup truck. He had placed it on a picnic table, pointed at the water, and told her to listen before she ever tried to sing. The world already makes enough noise, he had said. Your gift is learning when to be still. Claire parked beneath a sycamore tree and carried the trophy to the wooden dock. No cameras followed. She had turned off every interview request. She sat at the edge, shoes beside her, toes grazing cold water. For several minutes she said nothing at all. Then she placed the trophy beside her and smiled toward the empty air. "You were right," she whispered. "It took longer than I thought." The lake answered with gentle ripples against weathered boards. Back in Nashville, Daniel Hayes faced a storm of his own making. Morning shows replayed clips of his early dismissal of Claire beside his public apology. Some praised his humility. Others called it too late. Daniel accepted both. He canceled meetings, entered his office, and removed 3 framed platinum records from the wall. For years they had reminded visitors of his success. Today they felt strangely small. He picked up the phone and called the production team. "From now on," he said, "blind auditions in the first round. No visual judgments. No exceptions." Across town, Sophia Monroe sat in a dance studio staring at herself in the mirror. For the first time in years, she was not practicing facial angles or social media introductions. She was practicing scales. Slow, honest, unedited scales. Her manager complained by text that humility did not trend well online. Sophia turned off her phone and kept singing. Some lessons arrive as humiliation. Better ones arrive as liberation. Near noon, a black SUV rolled carefully down the gravel road by the lake. 2 executives from Los Angeles stepped out carrying folders thick with contracts. They had tracked Claire through Daniel's team and local records. One wore expensive boots clearly unsuited for dirt. The other shielded his watch from sunlight as if nature might scratch it. They approached the dock with polished smiles. Claire looked back over her shoulder and laughed softly. "You found me." "We had to," one said breathlessly. "You are the biggest story in music." Claire glanced at the water. "Yesterday, maybe." They offered numbers with many zeros, promises of global tours, designer stylists, prime television slots, and homes in Beverly Hills. Claire listened kindly, then asked a simple question. "Would any of this let me sing songs that matter?" The men looked at each other. They were experts in markets, branding, momentum, demographics. Meaning was not usually on the spreadsheet. The older one answered first. "If enough people buy them." Claire smiled with almost maternal patience. "Then you still do not understand. What happened last night?" She stood, took the trophy in one hand, and began walking back toward her car. The executives followed in stunned silence, suddenly aware that some people cannot be bought because they were never for sale. 3 months later, the old brick theater on the east side of Nashville had a line wrapped around the block before sunrise. Teachers stood beside truck drivers. College students waited with retirees in folding chairs. Mothers held the hands of daughters who wanted to sing. Fathers carried coffee for wives who had once given up dreams and quietly picked them back up after hearing Claire Bennett's story. No giant sponsor banners covered the entrance. No luxury brand logos flashed across the marquee. Instead, hand-painted letters read one simple title: Songs That Matter. Claire had refused every offer that demanded she become something polished, louder, younger, trendier, or easier to market. She signed one deal only after rewriting it herself with the help of a local attorney who still charged by the hour and drove a 15-year-old pickup truck. Creative control remained hers. Ticket prices stayed low enough for working families. A portion of every seat funded music lessons for caregivers, widows, veterans, and adults who believed their chance had passed. Industry executives called the plan unrealistic. Then every show sold out in 14 minutes. Backstage, Claire adjusted the same cream sweater over a dark blue dress and smiled at the memory of all the people who had tried to replace it. Stylists had begged to redesign her image. Publicists had offered phrases like reinvention and luxury identity. Claire kept the sweater. "It reminds me who applause belongs to," she told them. Daniel Hayes knocked softly on the dressing room door and stepped inside carrying a bouquet of wildflowers from a roadside market. His expensive suits were gone. Tonight he wore jeans and a plain button-down shirt. He had resigned from 2 television boards, funded scholarship programs for late-blooming artists, and publicly admitted that success had once made him visually blind. "For opening night," he said, handing her the flowers. Claire accepted them warmly. "You did not need to bring anything." Daniel glanced around the modest room. "I know. That is why I wanted to." Across the hallway, Sophia Monroe was finishing vocal warm-ups. After months of quiet practice, she had asked Claire for permission to open the concert. Not as a star, not as a headline, as a student beginning again. Claire had said yes immediately. The house lights dimmed. Thousands of conversations softened into anticipation. Claire stood in the wings and looked through a slit in the curtain. The crowd was not glamorous. It was better than glamorous. It was real. Nurses still in scrubs. Mechanics with grease under their nails. Couples holding hands through gray hair. Teenagers with notebooks full of lyrics. People who knew what sacrifice cost. Sophia walked to center stage first and sang one unadorned song with honesty that would have been impossible a season earlier. The audience embraced her growth with generous applause. Then she turned toward the wings and said, "Please welcome the woman who taught us that talent can wait, but dignity should not have to." Claire stepped into the light. The ovation rose instantly, but she lifted one hand and the room quieted. "Before I sing," she said, "this stage belongs to anyone who thought life had made them too late." In the third row, a 62-year-old grandmother began to cry. In the balcony, a man who had sold his guitar 20 years earlier stared at the stage like a door reopening. Claire sat at the piano and began the same first chord that had stunned the audition hall months ago. This time no one laughed beforehand because the world had learned. Her voice filled the theater, richer now, freer now, carrying not